This is episode 12 with Zephan Blaxberg.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. And today we have a very cool guest, Zephan Blaxberg, joining us for episode 12. Now, Zephan is the host of the Year of Purpose podcast and the author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Life Rescripted. Find your purpose and design your dream life before the curtains close. After hearing his story on an interview he did for another podcast, I just knew I had to get him on. Zephan has an awesome story, which includes being let go from his job, starting his own super successful business, which has seen his work featured in the White House and major sporting venues around the country, and eventually taking a travel break, which all led to the launch of his podcast and book, which we get to in the interview. Now, in this interview, you're going to learn, should you build your passion project on the side or go all in? How to overcome fear and make the leap to freedom a little easier, why we've been asking the wrong questions when trying to find our purpose, plus what you should be asking instead, the Life Rescripted transformation process, plus Zephan's biggest tip, and letting go of people who don't support your vision. Now, right at the end of the interview, Zephan was really kind to provide a free copy of the audiobook of Life Rescripted, which you can get in the show notes, along with all the other resources and links we mentioned. And you can find that at briantier.com/012. But for now, let's go hang out with Zephan. Welcome back, everyone. And I'm really excited to be speaking to today's guest. It's Zephan Blaxberg. Zephan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling like a bit of a fangirl. I first heard about Zephan's story on Pat Flynn's podcast, which, if you guys aren't familiar, it's probably one of the biggest podcasts in the world. And I immediately knew I had to reach out to this guy and speak to him. And here he is today. So, Zephan, thanks for being here. And I wonder if you could just talk people through, who is Zephan Blaxberg, and what did you're still very much in the quarter life stage, but I mean, what did your 20s look like going through that stage?
Totally. So it's a really long story, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. But basically, I graduated college in 2010, went straight into a job with a marketing company running their video department, where they would put huge conferences on around the country and teach other business owners how to run a successful business. And after about a year, the owner of that company sold the business, and very quickly they came in and just said, we're moving this to Chicago, and you're not going with us. And so I started freelancing my video work while I was on unemployment for about 3 or 4 months, and just applying to every job left and right, because I thought that what I was supposed to do was have a job. I didn't think, oh, hey, dummy, you're freelancing. Why don't you just do this 40 hours a week? So it hadn't quite clicked at that time. And so I got a job at the Apple Store, working behind the Genius Bar, fixing iPhones, iPads, iPods, anything like that. And it was okay for, the first 6 months, but the magic wore off really quickly. And I just soon realized that, I wanted to make a bigger change in the company, and I wasn't in a position to do that. So after about a year of being there, I left in May of 2013, and really just didn't look back. It all boiled down to a really bad customer experience for me. And it was one of those days where I just kind of walked out at the end of the day and I was like, you know what, I'm going to quit. And people say that for such a long time, and they never end up doing it. And I knew that I was going to do it. I just didn't know how. And it wasn't until a mentor of mine took me out to dinner and was like, you don't have to make, I was making $30,000 a year at the time. He was like, you don't have to make $30,000 right now. The big thing I was missing out on was that I wasn't thinking that this is a slow process over time, over the course of 12 months. And if you actually do the math, 30,000 divided by 12 is only $2,500 a month. And you break that down even further, let's just say if you're working 250 days out of the year, that's assuming that you work 5 days a week and you get 2 weeks off for vacation, that 30,000, and if you take that and divide it by 250, you're actually getting about $120. So $120 a day is all you really have to replace if you're working that really annoying job that you don't want to work anymore. And if your number is 30,000. And so I left. I started a video production company, quickly became successful, landed gigs in the White House, landed videos inside of multiple NFL, NHL, and MLB stadiums across the country. So, we're talking 60, 70, 80,000 people seeing my videos on a screen all at once, and use that and leverage that in a position where I went to some of the top level coaches and marketers and said, hey, like, here's where I've been, here's what I've done. I'd like to work with you too. And so really just leveraging every little piece that I had accomplished piece by piece to build it. And ultimately, that's where I've wound up today. Is I've got my video production company. And after taking a little 2-month stint to travel, hack, and couch surf my way around the country, the podcast was born. And the podcast, the Year of Purpose podcast, has been running for almost a year and a half now. And that brings me to present day.
Yeah, man, that's so... that's such a cool story, and thank you so much for sharing. I want to rewind to when you were still working as a sort of the Apple store. You were freelancing on the side at the same time, right?
Yeah, I actually was very lucky that someone at the company I worked at before the Apple store, actually it was my boss, because everyone was let go. She had started her own business and started putting on very large events where she needed a videographer to help her make videos. So I'd worked out a deal with her where I said, how about this? I don't have all the equipment that I need to do this properly. If you buy me the equipment, I won't charge you any money. And for you, it's a business expense. And for me, I get exactly what I would put the money towards anyway. So it was a really good deal that we worked out, where I just slowly started building up my gear list of all the cameras and things that I needed to make it happen, and did it in such a smart way because I didn't have to, report any of that stuff on taxes. It was a benefit to her because she could write it off as an expense, and I didn't have to pay taxes on any of the income because I wasn't technically getting any money. So that worked out really well at that time when I was freelancing and building up really what I needed so that when it was time to go full time, I didn't have to buy anything.
Yeah, man, that's so cool. So if people are listening and they have like a passion project or a side gig that they're thinking of doing, would you recommend, like now looking back, would you recommend they start building that on the side, or they just dive in and the sort of jump ship, quit your job and focus on your passion project thing?
I mean, I'm a little bit intense. So for me, it's kind of like I was one of those kids in college where if I wrote a term paper, as soon as I wrote the last sentence, I didn't go back and revise it or look for spelling errors. Like once I had completed it, I was done with it. So for me, I think that if you're intense enough and you're willing to take a bigger risk for a bigger reward, I think it's okay to take the jump. But if you're trying to do it the smart way, it really is kind of important to just start that slowly on the side and work your way up, because you never know if your first idea is going to be a bomb or not. And I think it's just so important that if you started something on the side and 6 months later, you're just like, I've learned so much about this and who I am when I'm doing this thing. And I know that it's not what I want to do for, the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years. So I think that it's more important to start it on the side, unless you want to just jump in and take a big risk. For me, the only safety net I really had was at the time I was working I have lived in my parents' house, so I didn't have to pay rent. And also when I left Apple, I actually took $5,000 that I had saved up and I put it into a investment account and just, bought a bunch of stocks with it and said, this is my if I screw this up fund. And I knew that 5,000 wasn't going to get me very far, but living from home, it could easily hold me over for about 6 months. So I basically said, if this doesn't work within 12 months time, I'm still going to be at home and I've got this fund that will be growing because I'm investing it, and I can always cash out on that as an emergency. So while it does seem like I just kind of ran and jumped off the cliff, there were definitely a couple little safeguards in there just to be a little bit more careful about that.
Yeah, and I suppose that helps with. I was going to ask, I mean, if people are going to do the jump ship all in route, like how do you find that courage to leave the 9 to 5? But I suppose having that sort of runway does help, and like you
Yeah,
said,
I mean it's easier to look back, right? Like
yeah,
if I go and log into that same account where I put that $5,000 3 years ago, I'm gonna do this while I'm on the call with you because I've invested smartly and just thrown a couple bucks in there here and there. So I'm logging in right now. I use Scott Trade for anyone who's curious. That $5,000 that almost exactly 3 years ago to this recording I put in there is now $13,462.
jeez,
So, I mean, looking back, it's so much easier to say, hey, was that a good idea? Yes, it was a very good idea. But I think that to gain the courage, part of it is seeing these small possibilities inside yourself. So, the example that I love is I think it was the 4 minute mile. And a lot of people know this story was that no one had ever broken this record of being able to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And for years and years and years, it was never possible. And then once the person who broke that record did it, there were like 100 people in the next 90 days that did the same thing because they saw that it was possible. So I
yeah,
think that anyone who's really afraid of taking the jump, you have to start recognizing those little possibilities in you, those little wins, like one of the first big wins for me was I went to a networking event that I was afraid to even introduce myself. Like my palms got sweaty and I was hyperventilating because they're going around the table and everyone has to say who they are and what they do. And I'm like, I'm just going to leave. Like, I don't know why I'm here. There's no way this is going to help me. And by the end of it, I met a guy who actually called me 2 months later and said, hey, I'm doing this project for the Philadelphia Eagles, the NFL football team, and they need to put up a video inside the stadium on the big screen. Can you do this? And I said, yeah. And I think that as long as in that moment you can really recognize that you were given a really huge possibility and a really amazing step forward and hold on to that and utilize that and leverage that and know that you made this possible. What else could you make possible? I think that's where you can kind of start to overcome that fear is just look at those small possibilities and watch how they start to connect to each other.
oh, that's really valuable. And now, I know you said it's easier looking back. After I read on your website as well that you said after doing your own thing for a year and a half, it started feeling like a job again, and you were kind of struggling to find that motivation to make the money that you needed. Could you dive into that a bit and tell us about that experience?
Yeah, so being in that sort of freelancer role, like I don't identify nearly as much as being a freelancer anymore. But your first couple of years, especially when you're a one-man band, you don't get a paycheck every 2 weeks like you did when you were in a job. And so it's a very uncomfortable point, and you have to know whether or not you're willing to deal with that. And so for me, it was starting to get to this point where I'm like, there's some serious ups and downs here. I mean, I've had entire months where I'm like, I have just enough money to pay rent and I don't know what I'm going to do next month. Like there's nothing on the calendar. And so I really had hit this tough point where I had been working so hard in my business. I hadn't even stopped to reward myself for what I had accomplished or to even look back at what had happened. And there's like this line in the song, and the line goes, "I've had my pain, now where's my glory?" And I think that we kind of start to get into this entitled position of like, hey, I've been struggling for the last year and a half. Like, why is this not paying off? And the funny thing is, when you get to that point, that's where you're right on the cusp of the great thing that's about to happen. And there is no way for you to see that, but you have to know that right at that point where you're pretty much ready to give up on everything and walk away, like that is where you are on the verge of everything just falling into place. And so for me, I was kind of at this point where it was like, I need to take a step back, analyze where my life is, both my life in business and outside of my business, because I wasn't really taking care of myself outside of work. And for me, that manifested itself in teaching myself how to travel, hack, and couch surf around the country. And in taking 2 months and just saying, I'm locking up my house, I'm leaving my car, and I'm just going. And I'm going to find out, who is Zephan when you take away the security of having a car and being able to get out of situations? Who is Zephan when you take away the familiarity of being able to get around my hometown, and I've got to rely on a map on my iPhone. And if my iPhone battery dies, I don't have this map to get around the city. So I've got to use part of my brain to remember where I was coming from. And, really find out who you are when you strip away all those things. So for me, it was easiest, much like going into my business, just to dive headfirst into, what is the toughest thing I could put myself in right now? And that was, let's take away all the securities and just see who I am when I'm out there and have to rely on no one but myself. And that's kind of where I was at that point, which was a huge pivot point, because that's ultimately what led to the podcast. That's what led to meeting hundreds, if not thousands, of people from all over the world. That's what led to interviewing 150 successful entrepreneurs all around the globe in 12 months, and really learning what they were doing. And so I think, that goes back to that fear point of, there's something great on the other side of this. You just have to be willing to step into that space and be okay with that uncomfortable area.
Yeah, and for everyone listening, I highly recommend you go check out the Year of Purpose podcast. I'll link to it in the show notes. I actually chatted to Brian last night about on both of our shows, because we did kind of a back-to-back, and we both chatted about how beneficial it is to travel once in a while and to, especially on your own, and really learn who you are when you stripped of all your comforts and that familiar environment. Now, we mentioned the Year of Purpose. How do people listening find our purpose? I mean, it's such a common question, but I'd love to get your take on it based on all the work you've done yourself and from interviewing, dozens of guests. Is this question of how do we actually find that purpose?
Totally. So I think a big part of that is that for a long time now, we've really been asking the wrong questions. And this is why so many people are getting stuck, is we get stuck there thinking, what is my purpose? What am I meant to do? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And we get into this thinking of, what could I do right now that in 10 years I'm still going to be really happy doing? And the truth is, it's going to change. Like, I really think that your purpose pivots and adjusts almost every single year. When I don't have a child right now, but I'm sure in the future when I do have a child, like, my biggest purpose will be to provide that child with everything he possibly needs to grow up and live a happy and healthy life. And so I think that your purpose is going to constantly be changing. We grew up in this time period where we were raised by our parents who were raised in the times of World War II, and times where, you go to work and you do one job and you specialize in that job and you do it for 40 or 50 years and then you retire, and that was your life. And we were raised in a totally different time period where, you see people on YouTube who are making millions of dollars a year just putting up goofy videos. That didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago. It wasn't even a possibility. And so I think to start with discovering your purpose, you really have to find out what are the things not that light you up, but that actually piss you off. And I'll clarify this in a second. So I think that there are things that we can get really heated about because we care about them so much. And that's part of where you're going to find some of the things that you should be doing. Like, what are the things that you see in other people or even in yourself that really upset you? For a lot of my personal trainer friends, it was, I'm really upset seeing all these people unhealthy, in pain, not able to walk down a flight of stairs, unable to walk up a hill without getting winded. I mean, they were seeing these things in other people's or in themselves that was upsetting them. And that's when they went off to start and make a difference about it. And so for me, a lot of it was I was getting really pissed off seeing people who were unhappy, who stayed in that same job, who didn't do anything about it, who never made that change about their situation, but continued to whine and complain about it. And that was something big for me where there was this turning point. But also, I mentioned in my book, so for those of you tuning in, Life Rescripted, which is available on Amazon, Life Rescripted, there's this chart, and basically it's like a Venn diagram. And I will be the first to admit that I am not the first one to create this, but this was something that I found that I think is super helpful. And when you start to find your purpose, you're going to realize that it's at the intersection of four things. It's something that you love, it's something that you're great at, it's something that you're paid for, and it's something that the world needs more of. And I think that at the intersection of those four things is really where you're going to start to find it click. But much like how, our brains have trouble pushing out words into spoken language sometimes, I think when you ask that question, what is my purpose? You get stuck in that same sort of thing of trying to word a question that can't exactly be phrased. And so, it's really going to be at this intersection. Just to go a little further for a second, if it's something you love and it's something that you're good at, it's a passion, and that's great, but it's not paying you and the world doesn't need it. If it's something that you're great at and it's something that you're paid for, it's a profession, but it's not exactly something that the world needs. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean the world needs it. Now, if you're paid for it and the world needs more of it, it's a vocation. It's not exactly something that you're passionate about. It's not really like you're on a mission to make a big change. I mean, yes, it's something the world needs, and you're getting paid, but that's half the battle. There's still this internal side of you need to be happy and fulfilled doing it. And then the last one is if it's something that the world needs more of and something that you absolutely love, it's a mission. And that's awesome, and that's half the battle. But if you're not good at it, it's not going to help nearly as many people. And if you aren't paid for it, you're going to run into a little bit of trouble further down the line. And I think that, one of the reasons why they always say, when you find something you really love, go after it and the money will come later. It's because the money will show up. But if it never shows up, you're going to run into some trouble because you won't be getting rewarded for the hard work that you're putting in.
Yeah, I saw something on Facebook just this week from Rich Litvin. And he spoke about having like sexy projects and cash projects. So, our sexy projects are those passion side gig type things, which we feel sort of driven to do. And then you have your cash projects as well, which sort of bring the bills and bring in the cash and pay the bills, which I think is quite a cool distinction as well.
Yeah,
Now,
there's actually a really good book I'll just mention real quick by a guy named Rolf Potts. It's ROLFPOTTS, called Vagabonding, and it's about the idea of long-term travel. And he really drives home that, some people will go and work these jobs for 6 months and know that it's a means to an end. They know that the reason why they're working this is because it allows them to travel the other 6 months out of the year. And so much like what you were saying there is that sometimes people have to have this thing that pays the bills so that they can do the thing they're really passionate about. And you have to be okay with that.
Yeah, that's an amazing book. I've read that myself before I went backpacking, actually.
Nice.
So we mentioned your book, which I'll link to in the show notes. Again, it's Life Rescripted. And I think in the book you have the Life Rescripted transformation process.
Yeah, so I've actually got a really cool free giveaway for everyone inside the book. And you guys are more than welcome to, I'm going to do this real quick. How about this? So for anyone who's just listening in right now, if you are like me and you're not as good of a reader, but you like audiobooks, if you just go to rescripted.life/free, so that's rescripted, no dashes or anything in there, .life/free. You can actually get the audiobook totally free right now. And then if you actually liked it, I would ask that you please support just buying, the Kindle or paperback version and maybe gift it to somebody. But once you get the book, there's a bunch of free bonuses and things. And if you're interested in that, it's just rescripted.life/bonus. You don't even have to get the book to go in there and get that stuff. You're more than welcome to just jump over to that page and get it. And I hope that you guys, really find some value out of that. Because for me, it was not to make a lot of money. In fact, this book, despite becoming a #1 bestseller, has really only broken even just from the amount of money and time I had to put into it. So I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this to really just get a message out there and have people think about it a little bit differently.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And for those of you listening, I'll put a link again in the show notes. So there's really no good reason not to go and do that. But could you walk us through some of those steps in the transformation process?
Yeah, so I mean the online part is this 8-day course.
Yeah.
In the book
Yeah.
itself, I talk about quite a few different things. For example, it all relates back to going to the movie theater. So, one of my favorite chapters is called Take Your Seat. And basically this is about how are you showing up when you go to the movies? Like, what is it that you're actually doing? Are you showing up early where you can get a seat, get the best seat in the house and you can actually see the whole screen? Or are you showing up late and you've got to sit in the front row and you've got to crane your neck to look up and you can't really see the whole picture? And all of these big things basically lead into a lot of the different parts. I call it the journey of the protagonist. So some of the things include climbing out of your cave, because a lot of people tend to find them in a really dark space when they're making their way out, much like Batman. I relate these all back to superheroes. Finding your kryptonite, so understanding where your weaknesses are and really just identifying your strengths and working off of your strengths. Creating goals, it's something that's so simple and so obvious, but people aren't doing it. I don't know why, but you guys have to sit down and create your goals. Training your mind and body, turning your enemies into allies, taking action, and finally the life rescripted action steps, which I would say, it's really more worth it for you guys to read through and get the whole thing, because I feel like a lot of this is contextual. But I give you a bunch of action steps that you can take towards the end, whether that's volunteering your time and watching how your energy changes. So for me, I work with a local youth group. I volunteer a lot of hours with them, and it has paid off. They're actually paying an all expenses paid trip for me to go and travel Europe and Italy this summer. So, you never know how that's going to pay off, both to your mental attitude and also to your life just in general and your quality of life. So those resources are all in the book. Those are just a couple of the steps in there that I highly recommend. But I think really, in all honesty, the only one thing that you have to do is take away those securities and find out who you really are. For me, that meant travel. For other people, it doesn't mean travel. I think we kind of chalk up travel to being this like magical thing that, helps people figure it all out. But some people don't like that, and that's okay. Maybe that means exploring a different religion or a different form of meditation, or, maybe you go to yoga 3 times a week, whatever it is to you. But exploring what it's like when you peel away the layers that make you who you are and figuring out what's underneath of that. It's kind of like peeling away at an onion. There's so many different layers, and you're going to cry as you peel away the layers. But eventually, once you get to the center, you've got this really nice, juicy piece of food that you can eat. And I think that's really how it works out.
I love that. Zephan, for people listening and they're wanting to rescript their lives, what are some of the biggest tips or lessons you've learned from your own process and working with clients? Things you believe to be true in this journey.
Yeah, I think that, there aren't loopholes, plain and simple. For me, I found certain shortcuts that have allowed me to get places, such as the travel hacking, but I don't necessarily think that's a loophole. I think that's more of finding the way to creatively think to create your reality. How can you think a little bit differently about things to get what you're looking for out of life? And so the Year of Purpose idea was really, I sat there and said, okay, everyone is making these New Year's resolutions, right? You come home with like 30 goals on January 1st of, I'm going to drink 8 glasses of water a day, and I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep a night, and I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week, and this and that and the next thing. And the problem was that, of course, 2-3 weeks into the year, you're already sitting on the couch watching Netflix, eating a piece of cake, right? That happens to so many people. And the problem was they weren't looking at the year as the goal. They weren't flipping it on its head. See, I made a promise to myself and said, as long as I wake up every day and I'm doing something that gets me closer and closer towards knowing that I'm living a fulfilled life, then I've already won. And yes, that takes a little bit of strong will. And yes, that does take a little bit of self-control. But I think that once you realize there's only one real promise that you have to make to yourself, and that is that you have to promise that you're going to make the most out of this very, very short blip of existence that you have, that's when the magic is going to start to happen. And I've lost so many people along the way, family members, friends. And I think that there's going to be a lot of hardship, but you have to make that promise and hold true to that promise. And I think that's where you're really going to start to see things change for you.
Yeah. Do you mean like people who didn't see the sort of vision you had for yourself and you had to kind of let go?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I told my parents, my Jewish mother, that I was going to go jump on a plane and not be back till who knows when, I mean, they basically said, all right, congrats, you're screwing up your life. I mean, my mom would never say that to me in those words, but like, this is what I feel like a lot of people had been kind of, itching to say to me was, good job, you're going to just throw away everything. And I think that you really just have to listen to yourself. And if you know and you trust your own decision-making skills, you'll realize that a lot of those things are coming out of the fears that other people have as to why they couldn't accomplish those same things. And so it was, and I'm not trying to call out my mom here at all. Mom, I love you if you're listening in. But there were so many people along the way who were just like, I don't know if you should do that. And I said, I don't know if I should listen to you.
Yeah, and the funny thing is it's those same people that are still in the jobs that they complain about and like still in the same situation.
Exactly. So how can you guys be one to speak? So I think that, if you really are seeing that you continue to complain day after day about things and you want to make a change, and if someone else is putting you down, but they're in that same position and they haven't made the change, then who are they to give you any advice?
Yeah, I love it, man. Zephan, I do want to be mindful of the time, but before we go, where can listeners find out more about you and your work? We have mentioned a couple of places and products and things, and we'll link to those in the show notes, but where can people get hold of you?
Totally. So the podcast is available on yearofpurpose.com. It's also on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Store, and all that good stuff. So you can pretty much find it in any podcasting app. If you guys want to tune in, there's probably over 115, 120 episodes by now. On top of that, the book, Life Rescripted, available on Amazon. Also, if you head on over to rescripted.life/free, you can get a free audiobook copy of that. And the best way to reach out to me is really on social media. I'm very active on Facebook. That's where everybody kind of keeps track of my travels and where I'm at. And I'd love to connect with anybody there. And I hope you guys really, just got some value out of today. It's really my goal to just share one person's take and one person's perspective on how they were able to make the change. And by no means do I want to come off as saying I've got it all figured out, because I think I'm figuring it out every single day. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing out.
Totally, man. So I just want to acknowledge you for coming on and for living a life that's true to you and, rescripting your own life and inspiring others to do the same. I think it's awesome work, and we're very much on a similar path with a similar mission. So I just want to say keep up the good work, and I'm sure we'll be chatting to each other a lot more in the future. One final question that I ask all guests is, what one thing can listeners do this week to start creating their quarter life comeback?
One thing that you can do, I think that you need to create that promise to yourself. Whatever it is that you want to do, you actually have to write it out. For me, that looked like taking a huge legal pad of paper and sitting down with a beer in front of a 2-hour-long movie and just writing out ideas of what I would like my life to look like in every single aspect. So, how much money do I want coming in? How much money do I want to be putting in retirement? What do I want to wake up and eat when I get up in the morning? What time of the day do I want to go to the gym? What's my workout going to look like? Really sit down and write out that script of like, what do you want you to look like ideally, in an ideal world, and maybe map out your perfect day. And then as soon as you know what that looks like, you can start making the little changes towards it. So if your perfect day means I want to get up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym, then start working towards that. You'll have a couple of activities and just pick a couple little things that you can implement and work your way until that script on paper is actually your reality.
Yeah, I love that exercise. And it's funny because a lot of the time, a lot of the things that we write down are actually achievable right now. And it's a lot closer than we think. Quick question. What was the movie when you were writing that out?
Oh, man, I don't even know if I remember, because it was more just like background music for me. It was just to have something there. But I think I was so focused on just writing down that script. And actually, that script has stayed on my desk for the last like year and a half. So keep that somewhere. When you do write that, keep that somewhere out where you can see it every day, because that's a reminder.
I love it, man. Zephan, thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, man, keep up the good work.
Totally. Thanks so much for having me here. And, if you're listening in right now, you guys, this podcast episode is really for you. And if you enjoyed it, go ahead and leave a review, because this guy right here on the other end of the mic from me is doing an awesome job as well, and is really taking time out of his day to make sure that you guys get to learn more. So go ahead and like and review and give him a star rating on iTunes so that he can keep doing this.
Thanks so much, Zephan. And also go check out Year of Purpose. Zephan, thanks for joining us, man.
Totally. Thank you.
So there you have it, guys. That wraps up another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. Thanks once again to Zephan for coming on. I'm sure you'll agree that this was a power episode. And if you like it, share it around with your friends and shoot me your biggest takeaway at Brian Tier. As for me, I think the thing that stood out the most was the thing that Zephan said about when we're ready to give up, that's when we're on the verge of everything falling into place. Super, super powerful. And I'd love to hear some of your own. Remember to head back to briantier.com/012 to pick up the free audiobook which Zephan so kindly gave to all of our listeners. And in the meantime, if you haven't left a review, please head on over to briantier.com/iTunes. I've had some awesome feedback and reviews over there, so keep those coming in, guys. But for now, I'll be talking to you next week, and keep on creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.